Hello friends, today we're talking about a book, specifically this book, Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race by Rennie Eddo-Lodge. It was sent to me by a fan of the show, Stacey Reed. Thank you very much, Stacey. As the title implies, it's about anti-racist philosophy, and as somebody who recommends and reads a lot of anti-racist stuff, I thought it might be good to sort of use my platform and give it a bit more of an airing. Not that it really needs it, it's already having a massive impact. It's been longlisted for the Baillie Gifford Prize for non-fiction. I think just the other day it was longlisted for the Orwell Prize for political writing. The title, Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race, was originally the title of a blog post that Eddo-Lodge wrote, which massively blew up and went viral and inspired and I think laid the groundwork for this book. And because it was based on that, it's retained that bloggy tone, which means that it's very accessible, which is why I would really recommend it as a great introduction to anti-racist philosophy if you've not read any before. In general, it's pretty easy, it's pretty accessible. The chapter on racism and feminism does expect you to know a few things, like it uses the term virgin-whore dichotomy, which is a little bit of sort of insider feminist art speak, but nothing that you couldn't sort of pick up with half an hour, an hour's worth of YouTube. Sometimes I was curious to hear a little bit more about certain things, so for instance, universal basic income is mentioned, but it's not really sort of explored in any great detail, and I might have liked a little bit more on that, although in fairness, that's kind of like me saying, why didn't you write the book I wanted you to write? So Eddo-Lodge describes the book inside it as a breakup letter to whiteness, which it's a description I really enjoyed, and I think really captures it. The bits I particularly enjoyed were the bits about British anti-racist history, because a lot of the anti-racist stuff I read comes out of the US, so it talks about the American Civil Rights Movement and like your Rosa Parks and your Martin Luther King and so on, and it was really cool to hear about things like the Bristol bus boycott. I'd never been told the stories as a white kid growing up in Britain. I'd never been told about like the lynchings in Liverpool in 1919. I'd never been told about the murder of Stephen Lawrence, which happened literally just 2 days before I was born. I had heard and read in academic texts the phrase white ignorance, capital W, capital I, and been like, oh yeah, I guess that's like a thing, sort of understood it conceptually, but this is like, this book actually has some stuff in it that's particularly relevant to me as a Brit, saying this is specifically what I've been ignorant of. So I really, really enjoyed the history bits of that. I was slightly puzzled though as to why the history chapter skipped over World War II. We sort of go early 1900s, 20s, 30s, British eugenics, and I'm like, oh, here we go, Nazis around the corner, and then boom, we're just going to skip to the 50s. And I was just sort of interested or curious as to why that break was there, particularly now that British people are starting to re-examine the legacy of Churchill, which it kind of isn't really touched on here. Although again, that's kind of like, why didn't you write the book I wanted you to write? If it's going to be your introduction to anti-racist philosophy, I guess that prompts the question, what should you read after that? I think a few of the works I recommended on the show before would make great follow-up reading. SHETH's Toward a Political Philosophy of Race is really good. I'll put links to all of these to where you can get them in the description. RAZACK, Casting Out, The Eviction of Muslims from Western Law and Politics is really good. Dorothy Roberts, Fatal Invention, that's a cracker. What else have I got here? Oh, Lisa Marie Cacho, Social Death, Racialized Rightlessness and the Criminalization of the Unprotected, that's an absolute cracker. Leela Ahmed, Women and Gender in Islam, fantastic bit of history, love that one. So that's bugger. So there's 5 more books by 5 more women of colour about anti-racist philosophy. And bonus, Aaron KUNDNANI, The Muslims Are Coming, is a fantastic one. Islamophobia, Extremism, and the Domestic War on Terror. Those other 5 are quite academic and quite in-depth. I would say KUNDNANI sort of breaches the gap between Eddo-Lodge's work and then those 5 quite nicely. I did have one fairly serious bugbear with the book though, and that came about because it contains an interview with Nick Griffin. Now, if you're not familiar with Nick Griffin, I need to be careful here because British slander laws are quite strict. He is the former leader of the British National Party, which was a very far-right British political party up until a few years ago when they and he all but vanished from the British political scene. He has denied the Holocaust. He has associated with people like David Duke, former Grand Wizard of the KKK, and seems to have no qualms associating with other people who deny the Holocaust as well. Are you starting to get the picture? Yeah, I think you are. The fact that the book contains an interview with him isn't what bugs me, really. I mean, that could have been done like really, really well. What made me kind of slightly cringe is that throughout the interview, of which the full text is presented, Griffin uses multiple blatant anti-Semitic dog whistles, and it's just not addressed. It's not picked up on at all. The book doesn't challenge him on that either in the interview itself or in the surrounding text. It's just not mentioned. The big question at the end of the interview is whether he's ever thought about the fact that the words he used tend to make someone like me feel quite unwelcome. And that's a question that Nick Griffin has been asked many times before, and he answers it like pretty capably because he's used to answering that question. What stood out to me even more is that during that interview, Griffin cites a particular source, which I won't mention, and he says this isn't me saying this, like the evidence is here. He gives a citation. And those of us who've spent a lot of time on YouTube, particularly those of us who watch Sean or who watch H-Bomb, will know that whenever somebody on the far right, really whenever anybody does this, but especially somebody on the far right of Griffin's political persuasion, cites a source, the first thing we do is we go and check the source. Because half the time, as H-Bomb and Sean will demonstrate, the source doesn't actually say what they claim it does because they've either misread it or they're just barefaced lying. And also then you have to check whether the source's claims have any basis in reality, because sometimes the source that they cite, they've cited it accurately, but the source is bunk. So Griffin cites this source, and in the text, the book doesn't follow up on it at all. It kind of says, okay, fine, and sort of accepts that the source says this, and even worse, later on in the book, it repeats the central claim of, well, Griffin's interpretation of that source as if it were true. I was really surprised and really thrown by this because I really didn't expect it. I was like getting on like a house on fire. I was loving the book, and then all of a sudden there's this interview, and then I was like, what? Where's the rest of it? Like, why haven't you challenged him on this? I know that the interview is intended to sort of give a window into how somebody like this sees the world. But I mean, the consequence is that it gives him a huge unchallenged platform, really. I really hope that at some point there'll be maybe a second edition of this book or a follow-up or something to sort of add a little bit more to that. Because I really want to recommend it, and I do recommend it as an introductory anti-racist book. Though I would say that before you pick it up, just check out a primer on what anti-Semitism looks like and what anti-Semitic dog whistles to look out for. Just so that you're aware when you get to that bit of like what he's doing. I don't want to just harp on the negatives though. In general, as I say, it's very good, and I definitely recommend it as an introductory text. I'll put a link in the description to where you can pick it up, and links to all the books I've mentioned today. It's Rennie Eddo-Lodge, Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race. Check it out, it's bloody good. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next video that I make. Bye!